Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Chi Johnson and I am a brand and communications manager at Intellum. Our team of award-winning customer partner and employee education professionals help the largest and fastest moving brands educate just those people. We are on a mission to accelerate edtech innovation that improves the way the world learns. And for almost 23 years, we have been observing and rethinking how people learn and collaborate. This webinar series Underscore has historically been our way of providing more insight into what organizational education is and can be. But this month, our first one of 2023, we're switching it up in celebration of Women's History Month. Today, we're spotlighting phenomenal leaders in education to share their experiences, knowledge, and practical advice. We will answer questions at the end of the presentation, so feel free to pop them into the QA panel as they come to you throughout this chat. I don't want to call it a webinar because it's very conversational. There will be tangible takeaways and things that you can apply to your own organization in your own life, but I want to make sure you know that we are just having a real candid conversation about our experiences in this area. So it is now my pleasure to allow my esteemed panelists to tell you a little bit about who they are. So first up, we have Jacqueline Anku, Director of Community and Education at Gusto. Jacqueline, will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I would love to. And Chi, thank you again for having me. And thanks to everyone who's made time to share this space with us. I'm Jacqueline. I am head of Community and Education at Gusto. I have had a very windy path to get to where I am today. I started my career in the art scene and actually thought I wanted to be a museum curator, sort of bopped around the art space in San Francisco for a long time, doing everything from waiting tables to doing front of house management at a local theater. Ended up realizing it was right for me in my career to go back to school to get my MBA. Came out knowing that I wanted to work in the economic development space. Worked at a local nonprofit microlender that was in service of underbanked entrepreneurs. We provided startup capital and business consulting services. I went to the business consulting side and worked with folks to build up their financial literacy. And that's really where I found my love for customer education and just empowering folks through realizing how they can do more and create more freedom for themselves, all through just knowing more, but then got that itch to take that one-to-one work and do it in a one-to-many way. Ended up continuing my work with small business entrepreneurs and accountants at Xero, which is a general ledger, a SaaS company in the space. And then from Xero, made my way over to Gusto to continue that work with the same customer segment that I'm so passionate about. And Gusto has by far been the best chapter of my career. I've had some incredible opportunities to build both our certification function as well as our community and customer education function at large, and have had many lessons learned along the way that I'll be thrilled to share over the course of the conversation today.
Thank you, Jacqueline. That was beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And next we have Sylvie Lau, Manager of Learning Technology at Contentful. So Sylvie, will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Sylvie. I am Manager of Learning Technology at Contentful. Our team is responsible for the Contentful Learning Center. And my journey to customer education is, of course, different. Everybody all have their unique and different stories. And I want to first use one sentence to summarize my journey. That is, everything happens for a reason, and the difficult situations can turn into opportunities for growth. So I actually have a doctoral degree in linguistics. When I graduated, I thought I was going to be a college professor, get a tenure, and just retire there. But life is never so predictable, and things change. I found myself needing a job in the industry, but I had no skills, no experience for any entry job, and was a high education. So I started as a part-time content developer at a startup doing mobile learning. And that experience actually allowed me to my first full-time job, which is at an education technology company that sells language learning to enterprise customers. And enterprise customers at that time were the HR department or the L&D team. So because of the experience, I knew a lot about kind of developing product for HR audience, which actually took me to my next position at Randstad. That's actually also how I got to learn about Intellum. And So I was working at Randstad again, developing HR solutions. And because I started getting experience with L&D and HR, so well, I then led to my next position, which was actually as part of the L&D team creating learning solution for internal employees. And because of my experience creating learning program and designing learning for internal employees, it became a natural progression to join this customer education space, because it's the same thing, but just focuses on different audience. And that's how I got to Contentful.
Well, we're glad that you made that journey, because we would not be able to have you on this stage today to talk about it. But I love that we've actually had a couple other Intellum customers mentioned so far between yours and Jacqueline's story. This is great. Loving this connection. And last but certainly not least, we would love to invite Tia Samuel, our Senior Program Manager here at Intellum. Please tell us about yourself, your passion, your work, and your career so far.
Thank you for having me as well, Chi. I'm excited to share the stage with everyone on the call. And my journey came through K-12 education. And I had similar to Jacqueline, I had kind of a windy path, right? I thought I knew what I wanted to be like every other year, and then it shifted like every other year, right? Every time I did it, I was like, I don't know if this is me. And so I started in K-12, and then very quickly I became a trainer. So I started training at the district level, and I loved it. And I found that I had more passion for training and enabling people to work in the classroom than I did actually working in the classroom. So I kind of stayed along that area. And then I also founded my own K-12 school, private school in Atlanta. And that's where I really saw my passion come alive, because I started doing curriculum development and I loved it. Watching somebody go from point A to point B to point C and like keeping them in a container along that path, that was something that I could really see myself doing longer than 1-2 years that I was kind of moving through my career at that time. So I stayed along that, looking at curriculum development, writing. I became a professor. I taught at a couple of schools, and finally, I found myself at Intellum curating for CatCat, which a lot of you may know as our Discover tab. And I started in curation, and then I moved over to do different educational endeavors. I was an LXD, and then I moved to program management, and then now I'm a senior program manager. And I do a lot of the fun things that you get to do in customer education, both of you. And I would say the most rewarding part of my job is serving as a consultant internally and externally for both our employees and our clients, and seeing anyone that comes up with that aha moment when they finally get it. And then it was something that you and your team did to get them to that moment. It's a very fulfilling place for me. So that's kind of my journey to how I got to where I am today.
Well, each of you have such individual journeys that I know that no matter where our attendees are coming from, that there is something very beautiful and tangible that to be able to take from it. And with you guys having such different paths to this moment right now, I want to start by just talking through the realities that like life is not easy as a whole, right? Every day we wake up and we're facing challenges and are having to overcome them and trying to figure out the best way to get through them. But I want to talk specifically, I'd love to hear from you about like the key challenges that women in organizational education face, right? Like specifically you guys, what are some challenges that you have faced? And if you would mind sharing some strategies that you have found successful in overcoming them. So how I imagine this flowing is like each of you can share a challenge and then share your strategy. And then if you guys have something to add to it, like I said, it's really like a casual, informal chat, but I'd love for us to dive in. Jacqueline, how about you start us off?
Yeah, so I'll take this from the perspective of having built customer education within a marketing function, which may be similar or different from other folks, but I would think the through line is if customer education is newer or nascent at your organization, it's really up to us as the program leaders to make the case for our programs. We have to sell the vision, we have to nail the execution, and we have to socialize the impact of our programs to ensure that our companies think of these as multi-year strategic investments. And this really has required me owning my expertise. And I think it's clear from studies and from life experience that women are typically overworked and under-recognized. So it can feel really hard, or at least I've had a lot of growing pains around what it means to step into my voice and into my power.
That is real, that that overworked and under-recognized. I think that is something everyone can relate to. Yeah, so what are some strategies that you have found like make that challenge less heavy, less big?
So I would say for me, it's just started with a mindset shift, which
Mhm.
has just been a day by day gradual growing process
Mhm.
of like, yeah, I am that person. Like, these are my programs. I am the most experienced person on this call or in this room when it comes to customer education. And just owning that and speaking from a place of authority, learning to ask for forgiveness rather than permission. So starting to flip the script in my own head day by day, and then just realizing like, oh, something good just happened. I wasn't fired, or like people don't hate me, or I wasn't called out as being a phony. So like having enough consecutive experiences happen that have proved to me of like, oh yeah, that is true. So like the fake it till you make it has kind of worked for me. And now I'm just in this very different place of like, I'm that person.
I love that. I think that's imposter syndrome is something like that's what I heard when you said
Yeah.
that was like very much like you can fall into that very easily. Like am I good enough? Do I know what I'm doing? You spend so much time questioning yourself and your abilities that sometimes you really have to be your very first loudest cheerleader before everyone else to get on board. Sylvie, how about you? Do you have anything that can like any tools that can help combat that you might use in your everyday?
So I think I totally agree with Jacqueline about, like changing your mindset. I think as a woman, there's just so many dramas in our own heads. Oh, what if I do this? What if I say this? Will people perceive me as aggressive or arrogant? Things like that. And I think it's important to have the courage to be disliked. We just think too much, we don't have to think about that. Just think about what's the best for you and advocate really for yourself, and just set aside those dramas in your own heads.
That is huge. Have the courage to be disliked. That right there is something I know I struggle with, but that is like, whoo, that's a big one. Yes, Kate, put that on a shirt. Tia, what about you? What do you do to combat that? Like that, what's going on in your head?
Okay, two things. One thing, well, I'll start with this one. I realized as a woman that our superpowers are the very things that people assume make us weak, right? So being emotional is what makes us have a unique perspective in the boardroom, right? So the same things that give all the dramas in your head is why we can multitask very well, why we can program manage very well, why we can manage things on a large scale and then see it on a small scale, while we can think about the learner, we can think about the business goal at the same time. So I think that our unique perspective is exactly what makes us a superpower in that role as a woman. So one of your original question is what is one of the challenges? I agree with both of them. And then I would say that when it comes to promotion or development into upper management, that can be difficult as a woman, especially if you have imposter syndrome, because I realize we don't go after the things we have earned because of our own holding ourselves back. Sometimes it's not anyone else holding you back. Sometimes in your brain, as she called it, all the dramas. I love that. We start making up reasons why we don't deserve something. So one of the things that I do literally is put my hands on my hip and put my back straight. And that makes me feel a little bit different when I'm speaking to somebody, even if it's on a virtual call. It literally works. Something about the posture helps me posture differently when I'm speaking. And I will say from my experience specifically at Intellum is using data. So you collect your data, you have your data to back up what you know to be true, and then you present yourself and then you let the rest go. So those are my things that I do, my little tricks of the trade that I've now shared with everybody.
That's
I
huge.
want to add something to follow up on T's point. So I once joined a confidence in women workshop, and the presenter was telling us in order to look more confident, especially in Zoom meetings, look at the top 1/3 of the screen, and it would help you actually present yourself as a more confident person.
That's big because you're like, I think the natural reaction is to like look at yourself and like,
and also look at the participant.
Am I looking okay, right? But if you engage in it as you would a regular conversation, you're removing that like that veil of digital, what is the word, like digital barrier, right? And you're bringing back the humanity, that conversation. It allows like the person you're speaking to disarm and really like come and be more present. So I love that. Like, and another like remind what I'm hearing is bring in the physical reality into the digital experience, right? It's that superhero pose. It's the eye contact. It's those things that we can often forget to do that remind us that we're human, remind the person we're engaging with that we're human, and therefore like at the end of the day, remind us like, hey, I'm having a human experience and I don't have to be perfect. I have to be present. I have to be active. I have to produce. I have to like just do the thing that I'm here to do. And ultimately by doing that, I'll do it well. Right. So that's my strategy, is like just focus on being present, focus on like just being as human as I possibly can, because that's what people relate to. That's what people connect to, and that's what they respond to. So that was a really great challenge. A lot of great strategies to overcome that. Thank you, Jacqueline, for leading us in that one. Sylvie, do you have a challenge that you specifically have faced in your career so far, and some strategies you can share with us to overcome?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So I think another challenge that you guys would all nod your head is lack of representation. So I think customer education is, I see everybody nodding their head. Yeah. So customer education is such a new field, and many of us report into professional services, customer experience, or marketing, or sales org. And those fields are still predominantly dominated by male leaders. And we've all been in situations where conversations are dominated by men and key decisions are made by men.
That's huge. That can have an impact on how you show up to work every day.
Mm-hmm.
So what have you done to kind of help combat that reality?
So I think it's important just to make sure that we have a say when decisions about education are being made. So if I see a meeting that I should be part of, I actually would reach out and ask to be included. And during those conversations, I also need to remind myself to assert myself so they are aware, hey, I am here, don't ignore me. Yeah, and I think also like having more women in conversation would naturally just help. A while ago, I noticed that a senior female leader in my company actually would pay more attention to when I wanted to say something and got ignored. She would be like, she'll invite me back to the conversation. Hey, Sylvie, I noticed you have something to say. Do you want to add? And because of her gesture, I had the courage to join the conversation. And I started doing that more to other female participants too. I pay more attention to others when I noticed that they have something to say, but just couldn't find the right time to interrupt.
I love that strategy, having like that language that you're speaking without having to say it with words is huge. Having that strategy beforehand really allows for the space to be more inclusive. It reminds me of this thing my husband and I do when we go out. If we see someone that one of us knows and we don't remember their name, it's like, hey, oh my God, it's so great to see you. Have you met my husband, Ken? And then he'll introduce himself and ask their name. If I don't immediately tell them their name, like we have this agreement, if one of us doesn't introduce a name, immediately go for the ask so it doesn't feel awkward. But having that language and having that plan beforehand allows us to remove that awkwardness, to remove that like barrier to making someone else uncomfortable. So it's having that language and having that agreement with another woman saying like, hey, if you like scratch your ear at this point, like I know that you need to, I want to call on you and specifically ask you to reach in, or if I pull my hair behind my ear, that's your cue to chime in right then and there. I'm going to leave a break. Like I love the ability to create that language with other women in the room. Tia, what about you? Do you have a strategy to overcome that representation issue?
Yes, first of all, Sylvie, I loved everything you just said. Similar to Chi high-fiving you, I'm giving you one as well. Yes, first of all, I agree with her in terms of it's a new space. So there's a lot of creativity in the space, which can sometimes feel daunting. And it can be awkward, especially when you're reporting up to people with competing needs and what they're looking for. And you have a strategy and you're trying to get it pushed to the forefront and you don't know how to jump in. It's kind of like if you've ever played double dutch and you're trying to see how to jump in so you don't tangle in the rope. It's the same concept of not knowing how to get your voice heard. And similar to Sylvie, what I do as a strategy is I do look at calls and I do pay attention to emails, and then I'll circle back and I'll ask the person, is this something I need to be a part of? And if they say no, I'll ask them, like, what's the objective of the meeting? And then sometimes I'll ask, do you mind if I'm just like a fly on the wall and I can just be at the meeting so I can hear? A lot of times what's said in the call can inform something that we're trying to solve on our end from the EDU department. So I will put myself out there and ask, do I need to be a part? The second thing that she said that I really love is when you're in the meeting, I do notice other people that are trying to jump in and they kind of do or they hit the It's okay. It's okay. And paying attention to that all the time, because a lot of times you'll say, it's okay. The person just said what I was about to say, but understanding everyone has a different perspective. So giving voice. So if you are in a management position, using your level of leadership to give voice and a platform for another woman to speak in a meeting is an excellent way, an excellent strategy to kind of overcome those barriers. So that's something that I do. And I always champion, even in my one-on-one calls, I'm always championing, well, what do you need? Do you need my support and not overstepping my boundary? Do you need my support? If you don't, I trust that you can do it, and trusting our employees to do it, we know that they're professionally paid to do. So that's my major strategy, is making sure that I see everybody in the call. And if I don't, following up to see what did I miss, and asserting myself and adding myself to calls. So I love that Sylvie said that. I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I
That's
do.
a big one. That's a big one. And I love the idea of sometimes just asking, do I need to be present for this? Does this have an impact on X function?
Yep.
Sometimes that awakens that bias within them to say, oh, yeah, actually you do. It's that forced inclusion that sometimes people don't even know that they need. Jacqueline, do you have any tips for this particular challenge?
Yeah, I feel so touched by this concept of finding your champions or being a champion for other women, other educators in the space. So that resonates in a big way for me. Something I've done from a mindset perspective is always assume that it's my job to make people in the room care about what it is that I'm talking about, versus just assuming that they do, or assuming that what I'm trying to put out in the world will be understood. So how I prepare for meetings that I know will matter is I do my prep. I always look to see who's on the call. I look them up in our org chart. I try to understand who their managers are, who I have relationships with and can do back channeling with, or pre-campaigning. So that way, if there's a point I want to make, I've laid the groundwork well before I go on to the call. And then I always try to zoom out and give as much context as possible. So that way my recommendation is contextualized based on the thing that my audience cares about. So if I'm talking to CX leaders, I'll be speaking their language, or marketing leaders, I'm speaking a revenue language, or sales, I'm talking about MRR. I always try to make sure that I'm framing up customer education through the lens of my audience.
That's a big one. That is a really big one. All right, Tia, what about you? What is a specific challenge that you have faced in this space and in your career that you have found to be consistent, right? And share with us some strategies that you've used to overcome it.
One challenge is definition. So defining things, because it is a new space and we want things to be so exact. And I realize other women feel the same way. They want things to be defined really clearly so we know how to hit that target. So what exactly do you need us to do? Okay, great. And then we do that thing. When you're in a new space and it's like fertile and it's becoming something more, sometimes it's not defined so clearly, and you have to be the definition, right? And then you have to go to a meeting and define it, similar to what Jacqueline just said, in the meeting, and make people care about it. So that's one thing that I have found to be challenging at times, that I will perceive something one way, and then I'll figure out that everyone else is saying, no, we defined it this way. But I know intuitively, based on research, based on just my own development in my career, that this is right. Is how do you stand your ground when you feel intimidated in a space and you're not 100% sure if you're right? And my strategy is to be okay with being wrong. And that is a huge strategy for me, is to not emotionally wrap myself up into being wrong and not knowing the answer. So if I do not know the answer, I have to be okay with that. But I do go into the meeting with an assertive stature, an assertive voice. And then I also am open in the meeting to learning in that same space. So one of the things that I have had to employ as a woman is to be okay with being wrong and not, I used to get so undone by it in the meetings. And I could see from, especially in a virtual setting, you can kind of see it unraveling, like, are you sure about that? And I'm like, do I stand strong on this or do I not? And I have found data as one way to leverage that, to kind of close that gap and say, well, do I have research to back up what I'm saying? And then I often do when I'm presenting it in that way.
I love, that's a huge one. And I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, is that being willing to be wrong. I say it, I'm always willing to be wrong. I'm okay with being wrong. I rarely am, but I love to be wrong because it's an opportunity to learn. It's an opportunity to grow. If you're wrong, that means, hey, I might be approaching something that's not the best way. Like, okay, I'm not right about this. Now, how can I be right from now on? Right. I love that strategy. I love that. Sylvie, what about you? Have any challenges? I mean, any strategies to overcome that same challenge?
I think having some startup experiences in my past career actually helped me to be actually more flexible and more receptive to different perspectives. And I often tell people that what I said right now might be more appropriate for the time right now, but if I revisit in 6 months, what I said right now may not be right. So just constantly being okay with changing.
That's a good one. I keep hearing consistently, be okay with changing your mind. Like if you're the same person you were a year ago, if you're the same person you were 10 years ago, then you're not growing, right? That's a sign that you're not growing. So I think in alignment with that, being able to be wrong, like being open to being wrong, and then also being open to like the definitions changing and moving and being flexible, it kind of goes hand in hand. It's a really great strategy. Jacqueline, what about you?
Okay, if I'm understanding the challenge correctly of standing my ground in order to get what I think I want, what I think is right. I love the idea of using data-backed research, whether those are customer anecdotes or data from our LMS or what have you. Definitely has worked wonders for me. Other very tactical things I've done have been to rally cross-functional support as a means to show this isn't my personal opinion, but I've done some coalition building to ensure that my colleagues across the space have a shared understanding of what it is we can accomplish through education. And like, here's this signed petition of many people in the organization who want the same thing. So that way I'm sort of amplifying my voice and amplifying my influence. And then the other very tactical thing I've done is to always parallel path. So if I don't necessarily think that path A will work, I'm already down path B, and I'm just doing both at the same time to ensure that I or my team is not blocked.
That's a really
so
good
I think
one.
it's just thinking on multiple levels, thinking about our cross-functional partners and backing all of it up with data that ultimately helps us land that execution piece.
It's harnessing the ability to house all the drama in our heads and applying it to multiple paths to success, right? I just love that that's a takeaway, the drama in my head, because drama is not an inherently negative thing. We just look at it. The word drama means to act. Right. My husband and I are actually having this conversation a few weeks ago. So I want to the reason I'm bringing that around is I want to talk about things that are unique to women. Right. And a lot of times we hear these words that are really only used when we're describing women, their behaviors and how they show up at work. Drama being one of those. But drama isn't, like I said, it's not an inherently negative thing. The word drama literally means to act, to perform. So it literally just means I'm doing something. It's based in movement. It's based in action. So when we talk about drama in our heads, we're talking about all the things going on, all of the stuff that we have to manage and think about and juggle, right? So now that we understand, like we as women have a very different set of different experience, I want to talk about recognizing each other in our workspaces. We've touched on representation and how it's necessary, but it's very hard to see in this particular immature industry. So how can we ensure that women's contributions are recognized in organizational education? I'd love for you guys to share a few of your ideas, a few things that you've seen work, and how you have elevated your own voice or the voice of women around you, specifically in our industry. Let's see, Sylvie, would you like to kick us off there?
Yeah, so I think as a woman leader, it's our responsibility for noticing, identifying, and creating opportunities for other women. And if we don't do that, it's likely they are too junior to speak up for themselves. And one example I can give you is I refuse to be the voice of other people's work. So if our content designers created courses, while I can promote their courses for them on behalf of them, but I want them to be the voice of their own work. So I ask them, hey, please go promote your own work in different Slack channels. So they can show people, hey, I did this. They can be visible.
That's really big. That's great. Great leadership. That's great leadership. Jacqueline, what about you?
Yeah, I'll build off of that because I'm a huge plus one to Sylvie's point of we all have to champion our own work. We have to champion the work of our team, especially if it's the work of other women who are less likely to speak up for themselves. So again, some tactical things that I've done to help my teammates is to provide them with a brief. So that way they're not guessing at how do I do the storytelling around the impact of my program. So they can go ahead and color in between the lines. And then together we come up with an internal distribution and promotion plan. So that way they're posting to the right Slack channels. They're tagging in people that they may have been intimidated to tag in. But because we've workshopped it together, like, okay, I'll tag in that C-suite person, because what is there to lose? There's nothing to lose, right? But sometimes it can feel hard to even know where to begin.
That's a really, really great point and a great suggestion. Tia, what about you?
Similar to what both of you all said, first to Sylvie's point, definitely allowing them to champion their own work and publicizing that. So they use social to do that, and allowing them to have that voice to amplify their own work or their contribution to work. Or if I'm doing it, to make sure that I'm kind of tagging each one of them to say, this is something that I'm putting forward in lieu of my team. And this is everyone that comes forward with that. Also in a meeting, giving them voice. But I find the best way to amplify the voice of women on my team is for me to step back sometimes. If someone already understands my presence, sometimes me stepping back and allowing them to take charge gives them space, because sometimes if both of us are in the same space, there is no space for them to speak, right? So I have to be very conscious of moving backwards so they can move forward. So if we're both doing a project together, I will then say, okay, I'm going to step back on this project and then allow them to move that project forward. So they get to own the wins. And we don't have to share ownership of that win. And they get to say, this is something that I did. And I get to kind of push them from a different angle as opposed to sharing that same space with them. Second, to Jacqueline's point that I really, really loved is the storytelling and allowing them to own their data and explain it back to whomever asks. So they don't have to say, yes, alongside Tia, and yes, I did it with her. They can just own their data and tell that story themselves. And we use different project management tools, but the biggest tool that I always find is the human touch. So you can have all the data and reports in the world, and that's great, but what's the story around the data? So because the person actually created the initiative or created that program, they really understand the story of what their data is saying to them and saying to the business and how it met the business goal. So just allowing them to speak their own truths, own their voice, and stepping back so you don't have to share space with them allows them to amplify their voice.
I love that. It's so much better to have many women than just one, right? Let's amplify as many women that are there as possible, because more voices mean more points of view. And when we have diversity in voice and we have an intentional inclusion, it really creates a better product all the way across. And when we really dig in, and we talk about how we have different learner personas, we have different people learning different things and different goals for different programs. It's really important that we have that diversity at every level and every stage of a program so that we can make sure what we're teaching is being retained. Which brings me to like my suggestion. I know I'm not a panelist, but this is something that I find really helpful, is I love to use very direct and explicit language. Raising my hand to ask a question that requires someone to give an answer that will make them uncomfortable is the best way to ensure that people are recognized. Did any women contribute to this project that is customer facing? Were there any Black people on this panel? Were there any people of the Indigenous population who contributed thought to this? If not, how can we ensure that that happens moving forward? Right? Sometimes just asking that direct question ensures that women are recognized at the next iteration of this project. It's not placing blame that it didn't happen right now. It's just raising a flag and saying, hey, I'd like for us to do this better next time. So that's a tool that I like to use sometimes, and I find it really helpful in all areas of my life, not just at work. And so we wanted to leave a lot of opportunity for questions, but I do have two more questions I want to pass around. And this one, I really want to talk specifically about organizational education and ensuring strategy recognition at different stages of the education program, like building. So Sylvie, I would love for you to share a strategy specific or a tactic specific to ensuring recognition at the planning stage of an education program.
Yeah, so I did touch on this a bit earlier. We need to make sure we have a seat at the decision-making discussions. So especially during the planning stage,
Right.
What I would do is I actually would reach out to our functional leaders and I ask them what are their business objectives, what are their problems, and see how we can collaborate with them and how they can leverage our work to solve their problem. And I think as long as they view us their strategic partner. They all come to us. And a lot of times it's the awareness issue. Like I was recently talking to a marketing leader at the company. And then when I reached out, I said, hey, I want to collaborate, see how you can leverage our material for your demand gen. And he thought I was part of the internal L&D. And I had to explain, oh, no, I'm not doing internal L&D. This is what I'm doing. This is the learning center. And we do this and this. And he's like, oh, interesting. I wasn't aware of that. And then we had this meeting scheduled, and he invited some of us to the meeting, and they realized, wow, they can really leverage our resources. So really reach out to those people who are making decisions for their functions and see how you can partner with them.
I love that. And just to make sure that I'm not like stepping over the things you guys have already said, were the tips you just delivered for like the different stages already, or did you have more to add? Because I know I specifically wanted Tia to speak about the production stage, and now I'm hearing your tips back. I'm like, that does sound like it was applying to the production, and Jacqueline's tip was to the delivery stage. So would you say that those tactics you've already shared are specific to those stages as well?
I would add that in the production stage, you definitely want to have systems in place to go from, as Sylvie mentioned, getting that business goal that you're solving for, and what systems in place do you have in order to actually produce. I have a quick example that we did recently, and that's one of the program managers and myself, we met with the VP. So we got exactly what they needed, and then we utilized the VP as our SME in order to launch a program. And then once we got the information at that level, again, I moved backwards, and then he was able to continue the relationship because the system had been created. And then we have systems for check-ins. How do you create that curriculum? What do you need to execute? And then what measures will we put in place in order to get the data on the other side? So throughout the life cycle, I'm using the same tactics that I've spoken about here, but specifically in this one that we just did, this is working alongside the program manager and then backing up so that they can own the entirety of their program, and then stepping in when they need support, making sure that you're collaborating with your stakeholders, making sure that you're working cross-functionally. And then specific to the production stage is making sure you have systems in place so that if anything happens, you can quickly get back on task so that you can execute in a timely manner. So I would say it's a lot of the same, but specific to the production phase, I would say adding that word systems, because that's how you can really even create a lane for greatness, because people know exactly what's expected of them, exactly what's needed. They don't have to guess. You take the guesswork out of it. And as long as they show up, they're able to quickly have quick wins and really showcase what they're able to do for the company.
And if you're a woman in that seat, it allows you to build confidence in your abilities and allows you to show up with the more, it combats that imposter syndrome we started with, right? It combats it in real time and allows you to show up and do really great work. And so Jacqueline, I think you did mention like the tips you gave were very appropriate for the delivery stage. Anything else you want to add to that, or we want to go ahead and move forward?
Yeah, I guess what I would add is when I think about delivery, I think about who's the face of my program. Who is actually on the front lines delivering the content? If it's an ILT, who are my trainers? If it's an e-learning, who's the talent that's being featured in these videos? It's almost like producing a movie where there's many people who went into the production of the thing, but who's your star? And how can I give a platform to diverse, powerful female voices?
Mm-hmm.
Something we've had a lot of success doing at Gusto is recruiting talent from our customer base and lifting them up as ambassadors who represent their profession and can also represent our company in a way that's far more meaningful than necessarily hiring our own training talent, but it's certainly taken a mix. I've also been able to give stretch opportunities to folks on my team who maybe want more of the experience working with our customers and delivering content. Okay, I don't care if they don't have years and years of experience. Let them experience it, let them do it, let them make mistakes. It's fine, it's a safe space. So how do we create a safe space too? And then something else I've done is written myself into the story. I always represent my programs. I always flex a little bit as much as I'm comfortable doing. You know, when it comes time to talk about Gusto Academy and I think about our G-Core page, I'm on it, which has been like a very strategic move because then I'm being equated to Gusto Academy. There's more external eyes on it. It's helped me raise my profile internally. So it feels odd and incredibly uncomfortable, but it's effective.
It is very effective because I know every time I think about Gusto Academy, I think about Jacqueline. So yes, don't be
Why
afraid.
not?
Right. So my takeaway there is don't be afraid to wave your own flag, to put the spotlight on yourself and that be your own cheerleader. That's kind of where we started with this. Like be the person, be the voice in your head saying you are good enough, you can do this, you deserve the shine. I really do love that. So now before I ask, I'm going to ask my final question at the end as a close because it's a bit of a self-reflection, but I would love to open the floor to questions. So if you are in this chat and you're hanging out and you have a burning question for one of our panelists about their career, about their work, we would love for you to drop those into either the chat or the Q&A panel right now. That is the perfect time. And we do have one. Kelly Reed asks TF specifically, can you share more about the transition from LXD to program manager? What motivated you to transition? We would love to hear you compare or contrast the skills or the skill sets of each.
Thank you. What motivated me? I wanted to have more of a control over the programs that I was creating materials for. So if I was to compare and contrast, in my LXD role, I was doing more of, if I use the Jacqueline's example of creating a movie, I was more of the support team. So I was creating the materials that enabled the learning. So maybe the handouts, I was creating a lot of the resources on the back end. And then as a program manager, I created more of the what from end to end. What do I want the learner to know at the end of this? What do I have to put in place in order for the learner to know that? And then the LXD would actually create some of those strategies that we come up with in the middle. So I enjoyed creating them, but then I decided, oh, I would love to create the curriculum. Oh, I would love to actually speak to the learner. Oh, I would love to actually speak to the stakeholder who said we needed this program. And as a program manager, I just have a lot more responsibility, which I actually wanted in terms of ownership of the program itself. But I loved being LXD. And sometimes I think we can all speak to, sometimes I go back to being an LXD because something has to be created and I just fill in that kind of way. But I loved being an LXD. And I was creating the learning experience and all of the moving pieces that it took, but I don't feel like I had as much control on the end to end. So that's why I moved into program management. Great question though.
That was a really great question. We have another question here. So Alex shares, we have heard about the challenges in learning that you've experienced as a woman in the education space, but I'm curious, what has been the most positive outcome or experience learning of the work that you all have been doing all have done being a female in the space? There you go. So share your best experience. Sylvie, how about you start?
I think right now is probably one of my best experiences. Yeah, I think the best experience is when your work is being recognized and people actually think you are the thought leader in the space and they come to you for problem solving. And I like to be recognized. I like to make an impact to other people's work. I think that's when I find most rewarding.
That's huge.
And thank you for inviting me here.
You're very welcome. I can't tell you how honored I am to hear that. Jacqueline, what about you? What's been like the biggest experience and the best experience being a woman in this space?
I think it's being able to pay it forward to younger women who are coming up to be able to create a culture that I've always wanted to work in, to create a space with a high degree of psychological safety where we can take risks and make mistakes and be ourselves in fun and quirky ways that are authentic, and then to let that shine through the learning that we're building, which then ultimately helps win the hearts and minds of our customers. So for me, the best moment is watching my team graduate into bigger and better positions, go on to pursue other roles that are maybe a better path for them, but just knowing that the experiences and programs that we've created together have influenced the shape of their careers.
I absolutely love that. That is beautiful. And Tia, I actually have a question that I think is really great for you. Carmen asks, how do you balance career, personal life, and passions? And is there a such thing as balance? As someone who juggles a lot, I'd love for you to share on this one.
I was going to say, I saw it come through and I was like, oh, I hope I get this one. So I'm so glad you get it. I was going to say that I don't think there's a such thing as balance. I think you do it all and you show up. Someone told me you can't be 100% in everything. So something will slack a little bit, right? So yesterday was my son's field day. And I had something due that I really needed to do. So I wasn't able to be there from 1 to 3, but I went at 2:15, right? So I still showed up. I wasn't able to be there the entire time, but when I showed up, I played dodgeball. He cut me right here, have a nice little cut to show it. And he has so much fun. And I had to give up the 100%. I'm so balanced that everything can happen. Right now, earlier, I heard my 5-month-old baby scream crying upstairs, and I had to mute my camera when I'm not speaking. So it's balance. I don't know if I would say balance, but you show up and you do the thing. I would say, again, I said this in the beginning, I'm gonna say it again, it's my superpower. It's what makes me show up that much more greater in my job, is because when I'm there, it's very intentional. I'm very motivated to be there, or I don't really have time to do anything I'm not motivated to do. I'm looking for support, so I'm not trying to do everything myself. So I feel like it makes me a better leader and a better worker, actually, because I have so much going on. I know I can't do it all. So I'm always looking for my supports, and I'm looking, okay, how can I empower you to do this and do this at this level? Because I need you to be at that level so that I can work at this level. So yeah, I find it to be, I often inspire myself at the end of the day when I go through, is that what you did in a day? And I can't even imagine it. But I don't think I believe in balance. I think that I show up 100% when I can, 90% when I can, 80% when I can, and 50% when I can. And sometimes I say in a meeting, I'm turning my camera off. My baby is a little whiny today, but I'm present and I'm able to do that. And that's okay. And I have to be okay with that. In the beginning, I was embarrassed and trying to make it seem like I had it all together. But I feel way more better having it all together, honestly, than I do trying to fake it. Yeah.
I love that. I love the phrase, the idea that balance is not real, integration is, right? It's not about balance. It's about integrating the things that matter into life, because that's what life is. It's integrating all of those things into what your existence is. So I really love, that's a great take. And I think a really great posture to have, those leaning into the boundaries to know what you can and cannot do, and then outsourcing the things that you cannot or will not or don't want to do. Okay, so we have time for a couple more questions. This one is for Sylvie. Can you share more about the courage to be disliked and how you balance doing the right thing while still maintaining positive connections with stakeholders?
Yes, I think one question I ask myself, would I regret if I don't do that? So if I want a promotion and I think I'm hesitant about asking for a promotion, would I regret if I don't ask? And also, I think be open to constructive feedback and let people know where I am coming from. And I think those are kind of my strategies to have the courage to be just like, I'm pretty sure it's impossible for everybody to like you. And sometimes what you do just have different perspective from different perspective for different people. And just ask myself, would I regret if I don't do it?
That's big. That is really big. I think the courage to be disliked doesn't mean you're assuming no one will like you. It just means you're showing up authentically and being the person that you can stand behind. Like, I stand behind everything I've said and done in this space, and I'm not going to go back and, like you said, regret it. So that's a great.
I think it's okay. Sometimes you realize, yes, I made a mistake, and I go apologize.
Yep. That's big. That's really big. Okay. So the last question we'll take from the crowd before I ask you my very personal question that you have prepared is, what piece of advice comes from Kate? What piece of advice would you give a younger woman looking to lean into her power at work? Jacqueline, will you start us off with that?
In my experience, I would say relationships are everything. So I think we tend to build up our domain expertise in doing the thing that we're great at, but that will only get you so far. So building up your influence, building up your internal and external networks will help you then leapfrog to that next phase of your career. So I'd just say start now. It's not some big daunting thing. It can be easy as like having a single coffee chat with someone you don't totally know one time a week.
Oh, I like that one. That's a really good piece of advice. And that leads me to the last question I have, and I want to give plenty of time for you all to answer that. There is another question in here, but what I want to say is, if you have more questions that we didn't get to, feel free to drop them in the chat or send them to me in an email. We like to deliver some of those questions in a written form on our recap blog, where the on-demand replay lives. So if there are some questions we can't get to today, we can answer those via text, and we'll put those on our blog. So my question to each of you is, if you could tell yourself one thing, like, just what would you tell yourself 5 years ago? Like, if you were speaking to 5 years ago, Sylvie, Tia, and Jacqueline, what would you say? Tia, you start.
Okay, it's not one thing. I really wanted to follow request. It's just three things though. One, everything you're doing is right. So you can stop wasting all that energy questioning whether or not it's right. It's going to lead you somewhere and you're going to love it. Two, you cannot imagine what the end will look like, but trust the process. Similar, number one. And three, build your network. The last one is four, and it kind of answers the last question. Identify somebody who is where you want to be, and then get really close with that person, whether they're inside of your company or you find them on LinkedIn, or they're one of your parents' friends, or you just saw them walking down the street, you like their gait, it doesn't matter. Identify someone, you like their swag, you like the way they work, you like anything about them, and then you find out what that thing is, that je ne sais quoi that you love about them, and then you can start employing it for yourself. So be very intentional about who you develop to be. You don't want to become somebody you don't want to be, trying to be a superstar at work. So I like to remain grounded at work, and I like to be very intentional about how I show up and who I want to be. So I mirror myself looking at certain people and then network with them, make them your mentor.
I like that. I like that a lot. Sylvie, what about you? What would you tell yourself 5 years ago?
Definitely resonate a lot with what Tia just said. And another thing I would say to myself 5 years ago is really advocate more for yourself. Don't think your work will speak for yourself. 5 years ago, I wasn't active on LinkedIn. I wasn't active on the education community. And that's something I regretted. I should have done more.
That's a big one. That's a big one. Jacqueline, what about you?
I would say to ask myself, am I happy? Sometimes success can feel so elusive and like it's always just right around the corner. But if I'm happy right now, let that be enough for the moment. Let me bask in that feeling and the accomplishments of today rather than always chasing that next high.
Those are all such beautiful things. I think that the practice of like just owning your present and speaking to your past self allows for this awareness that was really powerful in moving yourself forward. So I hope that in our panelists sharing those reflections to their younger selves, that you take some of those and apply it to your present self. Future you will thank you, right? So thank you all so much for joining us today. We very much and deeply appreciate you all joining us and allowing our panelists to share their stories. Jacqueline, Sylvie, Tia, you guys, like I had great aspirations for this discussion, right? But I am just so grateful that you all came and just bared your souls to this space. Underscore, I make a joke, it was my first child before I had my first child. And this being the launch of the 2023 programming has just been very special. So thank you so much for coming and being authentic and just being real with our people. I hope you guys got something from it. Actually, Robin wanted to know, what is you guys' favorite Spice Girls song? The band who made Girl Power super huge. I'd love for you all to share your favorite Spice Girls song while I'm pulling up details on next month.
Is that one, tell me what you want, what you really, really want?
Wannabe, that's a good one.
Yeah, same. Like there's no other answer.
Mine is Spice Up Your Life.
I have to go back and listen to it. I don't remember it.
I was in the world, spiced up your life. You don't remember that one?
Yeah.
No, but I will. Don't worry. I'll catch up.
I feel like what I've learned from that question is that Robin may have a secret obsession with Spice Girls. So that makes me really happy.
So next month, we are talking about the value of a customer-centric approach with Evan Hall. So please join us for Underscore on that. Sylvia, I did not forget, you did not share your favorite Spice Girl song unless it's Wannabe.
I'm kind of brainwashed by K-pop these days from my daughter. So I'm like having a hard time trying to come up with a Spice Girls song right now.
That's okay. We forgive you. Just put it down. That is your homework for today. Everyone put on a Spice Girls playlist and jam out to the girl power advocates of the world. And also, if you have a few minutes, I would love for you to share your thoughts on this series and on this episode of Underscore. Let us know how we can improve, what topics you want to hear. Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate you joining us for Underscore, and thank you from the bottom of our hearts at Intellum for sharing space with us today. Have a wonderful day, everybody.